Welcome to Week in Review. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and are getting ready to have a very eventful holiday season with your family and friends. You know, right now we're in a very perilous time in this nation. And you and I are conservatives. When I say that, I'm talking of those of us that are patriotic. We love God and His Word. We have a biblical worldview. And we put forth what? Well, faith and family and religious freedom in this country. We're conservatives because we want to conserve that which is biblical. Now, we face leftists. And leftists, now they'll use the term progressives, but what the leftists really are those that are socialists, secularists, Marxists, communists, and what they want to do is throw off restraints. You may recall that in Acts chapter 4, you had a situation where the early church, they arrested Peter and John because they were declaring the word of the Lord. And then they threatened them. They told them not to do it. But they spoke up and they said, well, you judge if it's right in the eyes of man or God, but we're going to tell you we can't hold back from declaring what we've seen and what we've heard. And then they went to their local church, their Christian community, and they prayed together. They prayed for boldness. And you know what they did? They quoted from Psalm 2. And we're living in a time where this is really apropos for us. In Psalm 2, it says that there's leaders and individuals that say, let's throw off restraints. We don't want any type of restrictions or restraints. And that's what I mean when I say leftists. Leftists, whatever they seem to touch, it's usually the case, they bring ruin to it. They're trying to do it with marriage and family and so many things in our culture. And you need to be aware of it. You know, I've traveled to 31 nations in the world, and I've seen there's no place like the United States of America. We've been blessed because we have a Judeo-Christian foundation, and we built that. And now we're drifting from it. We throw God and prayer and the Bible out, and people say, no, every man does what's right in his eyes, but it brings destruction. You know what? We have to stand strong in this hour, just like the early church did. And they said, we're not going to be like those that throw off restraints. And then they prayed the prayer. They said, Lord, grant to your servants to speak your word with all boldness, while you stretch out your hand and signs and wonders are performed in the name of thy holy Son, Jesus. We want to be courageous like them, and we want to act accordingly. Now, I've seen other countries. I've been to Russia. I've seen it. I've been to Nicaragua. I've seen socialism. I've been to Amsterdam. It's shocking. And you know, people say, well, I wouldn't mind living there and all that. You go to other places and you see how people live. And you might say, well, what about Canada and, you know, Australia and that? Well, you'd be surprised how difficult it is to get into these countries. And it's completely contrary to what we say in America with leftists saying, open borders, let everybody in, etc. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by saying what the leftists touch. They really bring, I'd say, ruin and destruction. You can see it what's happened with our economy. A couple years ago, we had the strongest economy in the world. There was no recession. There was no inflation. There was no high gas prices. Just go on right on down the line, or shortages. And it wasn't because of Putin and COVID and all the rest of this stuff. We had a new administration, and they caved to what? The Green New Deal and the whole planet that's going to be burned up and go down. And so we have to, start having massive spending programs. Things got out of control, entitlements, and now we're suffering with recession. You saw it over Thanksgiving when you paid 70% more for turkey. It's a very serious situation. What leftists touch, they will bring ruin. What about elections? Now, we just had the midterms. And, you know, I lived in Georgia for 11 years. And I think it's interesting to see how come some of these states delay. And it works to their advantage to have these kind of delays. They can't seem to count the votes. Florida does it. Man, the election board, you know, within a matter of hours, they publish the results. I live in Tennessee, and Tennessee is very conservative. We conserve biblical values here. We have a governor who's a committed Christian. We have Senator Marsha Blackburn. She's a committed Christian as our senator. We have 100 people a day that are coming here. They're leaving California, New York, and Illinois. They say, we can't take it, the taxes and all that. We don't have any state tax here. And recently, the president of Tennessee Tech, he found out they were trying to put some drag shows in. He stopped it. He said, no, we're not going to have it. You know, 5 minutes from where I live is who? Dave Ramsey. He's teaching people all over the world about principles of stewardship. And he's a man of God. I've been with Dave. I've spoken there at his place. He's a tremendous man. We also have Michael W. Smith. I know Michael. I love Michael. I'm not boasting on this, but he's a man of God, and his praise and worship has gone all over the world. We live in a place really where we have very low crime. No, it's not Shangri-La, but I want you to know conservatism works when you have low taxes. And you know what? The other thing is you can see today as leftists have touched elections, Tennessee came in #1 for efficiency and accuracy. The Heritage Foundation said it. But you look at some places and what goes on? Well, remember a few years back when Georgia, and I lived there, like I said, for 11 years, they said, look, we see the confusion and all this fraud and that. And so they put some common sense instructions and laws in place so they could have an accurate and honest, integrous election. Oh, what happened? The leftists scream, this is discrimination. This is, this is racism and all that. Joe Biden remember this when he said, this is Jim Crow too, segregation, I'm going to stop it. Well, they tried to stop it. The court said no. Having a voter ID, which was the main point, is going to stand. But I wonder if we're going to hear Rob Manfred of Major League Baseball commissioner. Oh, we're going to move the All-Star game because of this. And so who suffered? The minorities and the small businesses. They moved it. But so what? The midterms, did you see what happened? Georgia had record turnout, and it was efficient and accurate. When the left gets involved, you can see a mess. You can see the same thing today with, let's say, entertainment. What's happened with Hollywood in movies? I mean, people aren't going. What about late night talk shows? You can see the corrupt corporations that control things. I don't know if you saw this recently, but during the midterms, there were guests on late night talk shows. There's 6 of them, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, and then you got Seth Meyers and 2 other ones. And they did a study after the midterms, and they found out that these 6 late night hosts had guests. 47 guests. Take a guess how many were liberal, leftist, and how many were conservatives. You know how many conservatives? 0. None. It was all liberals, progressives, and all the rest of that. And they do what the corrupt corporate media tells them to do. You can see the same thing going on with education today, what leftists have done, and the teachers' unions, and, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association. It's a very serious situation. The control they brought, lockdowns, what happened during COVID and all that. Do you know that today, 60% of adult Americans are basically illiterate? Now, that doesn't mean they can't read some basic, things, but as far as instructional manuals or prescriptions and that, they can't do it. You go to Baltimore, they can't even find a student that can read at their grade level. Well, what's happened? Well, we see education where individuals say, no, we have to revise and reform and bring about CRT and LGBTQ agenda and stay out and all that stuff. Folks, it's very dangerous what's happened. You look in when the Constitution was being written, 87? Do you know that 90% of the colonists at that time, Americans, could read? And now today we say 60% can't? Let me read something to you from Thomas Jefferson. He made a statement, and I love it. I'm going to just read it to you. But this is what Thomas Jefferson said. Read this slowly with me. He said, those entrusted with power have over time and slow operation listen to this, they have perverted it. What? The power. They perverted their power into tyranny. And it believed that what? The most effectual means of preventing this tyranny would be to, here it is, illuminate the minds of the people at large. In other words, be alert, be educated, and that's what we want to do. And so we face what leftists have done. They've done it with entertainment and movies. My wife and I tape shows from the 60s and early on. And you know what? There's no foul language. Yes, they emphasize the nuclear family. You can see respect for authority. There's no nudity. There's no, crude language. Today, people are turning away. Look at even talk shows at night. You know, when Johnny Carson was on, personally, he was a liberal man, but I mean, he would have 10, 11 million people watching him every night. You could look at it, you could say, well, whether liberal, Republican, conservative, but today, you'll see these talk show hosts and they'll get 1.2 mil or whatever. And, it's just what's happened. What leftists touch, they ruin. Now, here's what the latest, and I want to close with this. We need to be alert to this. What the Dems are trying to do as leftists and liberals and progressives is push, and they're advancing it aggressively and rapidly, a Respect for Marriage Act. Did you know that? You say, well, that sounds good, just like progressive sounds good and reproductive rights sounds good. They use deceptive language and they mislead. And what they're endeavoring to do, and they're pushing it through the House and now the Senate, and 12 Republicans have endorsed this, is the Respect for Marriage Act. And their attempt is, bottom line, abolish marriage as we know it by redefining the definition of marriage. They want to make it where any arrangement, if a state approves it, polygamy, polyamory, if you have maybe an adult homosexual with a young adolescent, let's change that age of consent. As long as it's passed in one state, then it becomes basically codified and it becomes law, and you don't dare discriminate. Churches, ministries, you better be involved. Communicate to your congressmen, communicate to your senators, and let them know they need to stand against the so-called Respect for Marriage Act. It's right at the edge, and we need to take our stand. So we're living in a very challenging time, but as conservatives, we take a stand. We're people of principle, of patriotism, and we stand for that which is common sense and looking through the lens of biblical worldview. Let's stand strong in this season, take advantage of opportunities to share the gospel, reach out to those in need, tell people about Jesus. And just like we're here in Tennessee, we see people are moving here from all over the place because they're saying, I'm fed up. I come from California. I don't want to pay all this tax, 13% tax on top of all this federal tax. And then we've got tolls and this kind of nonsense. I'm getting out of there. I'm getting out of New York. I can't afford it anymore. I'm getting out of Illinois. The crime, the Dem mayors, the leftists, the liberals, no bail and no prosecution. We're going to have to take our stand today. And like the early church, let's do it. Whether it be right in the eyes of man or God, we're going to stand up for truth, preach the gospel, and we're going to pray for our nation that we will see a return to what? Conservative principles upon which this nation was founded.